I don't know about you guys, but I think that's exactly what we're seeing with Pokemon right now, as it's experiencing some truly record-setting numbers in a number of different areas. Now, this type of saturation will inevitably affect valuations. How could it not? Hey everybody, what's up from Pokemon Classics, reminding you that the classics never go out of style. Today's video is admittedly a bit more speculative than usual, but it involves the implications of the sudden, what I would describe as the massive supply increase that Pokemon has experienced really in the last few years, pretty much across the board, whether we're talking about sealed modern product, graded slabs, and even some of the card-related services and infrastructure designed specifically for collectors. And I guess the underlying question of this video is, has Pokemon experienced an unprecedented wave of saturation? And if so, how will overproduction across the Pokemon ecosystem affect valuations for those individual items? Now, I know this is a subject that's been touched on by a number of different PokeTubers already, like Danny Phantom, Nostalgianomics, SM Pratt, Twice Baked Jake, Cardinal Gaming, and I appreciate all of those perspectives, and today I wanted to offer some of my own personal thoughts on how this supply influx may affect Pokemon in both the short term as well as the long-term future, as well as some potential opportunities for collectors. Again, though, these are just my personal speculations, and I'll try to back them up with data. There's going to be a lot of numbers and graphs in this video, but I'm really more interested in hearing all of your perspectives because this is a subject that I don't have a particular level of expertise on. I really more specialize in vintage Wizards of the Coast era cards, but I'm always interested in these types of topics. So anyway, you guys will have to let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Anyway, part of my thesis is that Pokemon is currently experiencing the Bullwhip Effect, and if you're not familiar with that concept, it's an economic term explaining how an unanticipated spike in demand can actually lead to an overproduction of the good, and then therefore to its eventual devaluation. I like to think of it in terms of elementary school telephone. If you've ever played that game, one person utters a word or a phrase, and then it gets passed along with each successive iteration. It morphs out of control until it's no longer distinguishable to how it originated. Well, the same is true of a production line, except it starts with elevated consumer demand due to a shortage, and then that prompts retail stores to order more of the product than what they actually need for the consumer demand. Then the distributors, therefore, see all that demand from the retail stores and order more of it from the manufacturer. The manufacturer produces way more than the distributors want, and with each successive phase of the production wave, it grows bigger as each entity accounts for more demand than actually exists. And before you know it, the market is so saturated with product that it has to devalue that product. I don't know about you guys, but I think that's exactly what we're seeing with Pokemon right now, as it's experiencing some truly record-setting numbers in a number of different areas, whether it's the overprinting of Modern, which is setting some production run records that have never been seen before, the oversubmission of Slabs, which is also setting some record numbers as of late, or even the overcrowding of card-related services and companies, which are having to adapt and adjust to this new market. Anyway, I do think this is a critical phase in Pokemon, as well as any collectible, and that we're going to see stability return, some established values that are actually informed by the fundamentals. So I do think we may be at that critical juncture where fundamentals become more important than ever. But anyway, we'll get to that in just a moment. What I wanted to start with is by looking at each of these three areas. We'll start by taking a look at the saturation in modern cards, then graded cards, and lastly, card-related services. First, let's talk about modern. Last year, Pokemon surpassed its previous production record set in 2021. Now, in 2021, Pokemon produced 9.1 billion cards, and not to be outdone, the following year in 2022, Pokemon produced 9.7 billion cards. Now, these numbers are astronomical, and they're really hard to conceptualize, but if we put it in this manner, taking into consideration that Pokemon trading card game history has been around for 27 years, and during that 27-year span, a total of 52.9 billion cards have been reportedly produced. That means that over the last 2 years, 35% of the entire print run history of Pokemon has come into being in just the last 24 months. Now, this type of saturation is inevitably going to affect both the sealed and the raw market, at least in some capacity, since collecting does inherently depend on both rarity and scarcity. Now, I think it'd be fair to say that we can see the impact of saturation in a number of different modern products, including the Charizard UPC, which I think we could use as a case study for an item that had a really high level of demand when it came out of the gate, but was ultimately washed out by an unprecedented level of supply. I I think the same could be said of both Scarlet and Violet base set as well as Paldea Evolved. Now those are still relatively new sets and maybe they don't have the most desirable cards in them comparatively to some of the earlier sets of the Sword and Shield era. They're not doing particularly well and they're very readily available. Now what I did want to do though is point out the last 7 sets printed and how each one of them is experiencing downward trends from the last 3 to 6 months, including the raw chase cards as well as the box prices themselves. And the slow drip of reprints that Pokemon has slowly been infusing into the market has perhaps kept prices artificially higher than they otherwise could be if all of that product were instantly released onto the market. Nevertheless, these products aren't doing particularly well, at least in the short term. So again, I realize that many of these boxes have appreciated from their MSRP release, and that a number of these sets will do better over time as we get further into the future when those cards are less accessible and when reprints are done. However, I did want to point this out that we are seeing, at least to some degree, an inversion of the supply and demand dynamics that we've seen for the last few years, where before, cards were not accessible at all. They were sold out everywhere. There were price scalping going on, and Pokemon couldn't keep up with the demand. And now it's almost the opposite. Those cards are out there, they're readily available, and demand is starting to wane a bit. And this could have a profound impact on the mindset of the consumer, especially in terms of their expectations of investing in profit. It doesn't take much for consumer confidence to shift, and I personally suspect that the sheer volume of printing that Pokemon has done over the last few years versus what it's seen in previous sets, it's so astronomically different that there will be a profound impact on those looking to invest in sealed modern products, where perhaps they'll still appreciate over time, but that time duration might be much longer than what anybody's expecting, and their turns may be much less dynamic than expectations as well. But those are just my thoughts, my suspicions. You guys will have to let me know what you think about modern investing down in the comments below. Next, let's talk about the saturation of graded cards. Now, I know there's been a lot of discussion about junk slabs ever since PSA's backlog in 2020. And I guess the way I would personally define a junk slab is any card that's worth less than the grading fees to attain it, although I could also see a definition being any card that's worth more raw than it would be in a 9 mint condition, whether that's a PSA 9, a BGS 9, CGC. Doesn't really matter if it's in mint condition and it's worth more raw than it is graded. Doesn't really make sense to grade it. But anyway, what I wanted to draw your attention to is just the sheer volume of slabs that have been graded in the last few years, and that number has been accelerating at an alarming pace. Now, I got these numbers from GemRate. It's a website that tracks grading percentages and numbers and statistics, and primarily it focuses on PSA, which to me makes sense since PSA is overwhelmingly the largest grading company. They do the most volume, and I found this number shocking, but PSA is currently on an annual pace to produce 12.2 million collectibles graded this year, which is almost double its entire output of 2021 when PSA was shut down and focusing exclusively on the backlog. When they dedicated all those resources, they're doing almost double that just this year. Now, it's totally fair to mention that not all those cards or collectibles being submitted are Pokemon cards, and that's true, but if we break it down and look at it, TCG cards are overwhelmingly the biggest category of cards being submitted to PSA in this last year, and it's by a sizable margin. In fact, just last week, over half of those cards that were submitted were TCG cards. And if we further break it down, 7 of the top 10 cards graded last week, the most common cards, the most volume, were Pokemon cards specifically. You can see it here in this pie chart. Now, this type of saturation will inevitably affect valuations. How could it not? We have millions and millions of graded cards entering the market at roughly the same time frame, and I guess we have seen at least some price pressures already. Many cards have already dropped substantially and perhaps are finding a price floor, but we still have the floodgates of cards entering PSA and other grading companies on the daily. Now, most of these flooded cards coming in are modern cards. Many of them in the last week have been modern Japanese cards. And I guess that makes sense. Many of the vintage cards have already had their supply chain exhausted. At least the ones that are valuable and that have high condition have long since been weeded out for that value. But modern is consistently being released. There's always new sets, and so there's always an incentive to continue grading those cards. And so this raises a couple of questions. First, what will it take for supply and demand to stabilize, and at what valuation will those new values be set? Also, which cards will retain value when all is said and done, and which ones will have the fundamentals to grow over time? And I do think that's what this is leading to, is a larger awareness of the fundamentals that make something truly an investment-grade collectible. Personally, I think we're going to see a strong divergence in the next couple years of graded cards that are truly collectible and those that simply aren't. But those are just my thoughts. Again, you guys will have to let me know what you think about the saturation of the graded card market down in the comments below. Finally, let's talk about saturation as it applies to card-related services and infrastructure. Now, one of the places where I think this is most notable is with grading companies, and currently we have a number of grading companies that are jockeying for market share. One of the most notable being PSA, that made a significant financial investment into expanding their operations, hiring additional employees, building out additional office spaces. We also saw a number of new companies enter since the pandemic, CGC being one of the most notable. CGC, typically known for grading comic books as well as video games, but entered the market filling the void while PSA was shut down. There's also AGS, who's known for the AI technology and the self-scanning tools to expedite the process of grading cards. But there's also a ton of other companies out there, some that are still around, others that have already faded into the background. And a number of these companies have also made strategic partnerships with auction platforms and other venues to help pull in additional revenue. It's not just grading companies, there are a number of sales platforms to emerge since the pandemic as well. Now, obviously, eBay is one of the largest, one of the biggest in the space, but eBay has made some strategic and major investments into trading card games specifically, adding to their authenticity guarantee program, creating the eBay Vault, adding eBay Live, and even purchasing one of their competitors in TCG Player. There's also a number of auction houses that have traditionally catered to sports cards collectors that have embraced Pokemon. Sites like PWCC, Heritage Auctions, Golden Auctions, all of which have run some sort of special promotion surrounding Pokemon. There's also sites that specifically cater to trading card games, like Liquid Marketplace, Whatnot, TCG Player, Troll and Toad, that have all expanded and adjusted their operations in some way, shape, or form. Simply put, there are a number of different sales platforms available out there for Pokemon cards specifically that traditionally haven't been available, thus the saturation. Of course, we could even apply this to one of the more obscure microcosms of collecting, in vault services. Originally, it was just PWCC offering a vault service, only to be followed by PSA and eBay, both of which now have active vault submissions. So even in something like that, consumers now have many different options. I guess the point that I'm trying to make is that although competition is inherently a good thing, it does seem to me that some consolidation is inevitable. Some of these companies may be over-leveraged, others just don't bring enough value or innovation to the table to really win over a consistent market share. And to a degree, we might be seeing this already. We've seen a number of companies rebrand themselves and make significant changes. Some develop strategic partnerships with auction platforms or other companies within the collector space. Some that have undergone expansions of staffing and infrastructure, and some that have implemented entirely new service levels and new grading scales to try to win over those customers or to better facilitate their product. But will there be enough demand to support these companies in perpetuity? Personally, I don't think so. There may have been at the height of the boom. However, as things stabilize and supply and demand come back into balance with one another, I think what we're going to see is a question of value. What items, what companies, what things are truly valued? Those are the things that are going to be lasting and enduring, while other things are eventually going to get consolidated. After all, that is what consolidation is. That is a byproduct of saturation, is eventually the market will speak, and it'll speak with its money. Just as the Bullwhip Effect would suggest, it's my belief that the pandemic boom for Pokemon cards created a perfect storm of heightened demand that has led to what I would suggest is the great saturation. And that saturation is affecting all aspects of Pokemon, whether it's the overprinting of Modern that we've seen, the record level of submissions of graded slabs to grading companies, or the over-establishment of card-related services and companies that are all competing with one another for market share. However, that's not to say that this is some sort of impending crisis. After all, saturation and the inevitable consolidation that follows it are both critical yet necessary phases of the market cycle. And if anything, they only confirm and validate Pokemon as an established collectible by refocusing attention on fundamentals and reestablishing what's truly valued by collectors. Personally, I think the first few years after the pandemic were characterized by a spike in demand amidst a constrained supply, and now we have the exact opposite, a spike in supply amidst a diminishing demand as many fair-weather fans and opportunists have left the space. Soon, I believe that we'll see a market with supply and demand in equal harmony once more, at least That's my hope. Anyway, guys, that's going to wrap it up for this one. Let me know your thoughts on the saturation that Pokemon is experiencing, if it is experiencing it at all, down in the comments below. But till next time, everyone, I'm Pokemon Classics, reminding you that the classics never go out of style. Stay well, everyone. Have fun. And don't forget to enjoy collecting. That is, after all, why we're here. We'll see y'all with the next video. Bye, everybody.